tonight. Rob was going to just take us through some of his background of where he's been, some of the learnings, and where he's seeing beef going in the next year or two. So Rob, with that, I'll probably hand over to you and let you get started. And then at the end of that, if you've got questions, please everyone just put it into the chat, put it into the Q&A, raise your hand. Happy to bring it on. So, but yeah, Rob, thank you and warm welcome. Glad to have you here tonight.
Yeah, hi guys. I'm not sure if this is going to work or not. Technology is fantastic. Hopefully, oh, there we go. I just move this out of the way up here. Ian asked if we could just talk a little bit about farmer-led supply chains, and I suppose that fits in nicely. I don't know how many of you, I know a few of you, but I'm sure most of us are producing beef, and quite a lot of us are trying to make a profit at it. Some days are harder than others. I think it feels like at the moment. Some years are harder than others. But looking at supply chains and the future of beef production and where can we go from there, and I think Ian thought, because of the back of my Nuffield Scholarship, it might be a good idea to just have some discussion around where we've been from to going from backwards, up, down, left, right, and where we are in the future. I was very lucky, I suppose. Who am I? I'm a farm vet, but most farm vets you'll find are frustrated farmers. And back in 2014, we were able to sell our veterinary business and got investment, which meant that we could put money forwards to do something different. And there are a few of my friends are involved here, that I'm involved working with us over the years, are sitting listening to this, so I'm sure they've seen the best and the worst of it. At the moment, I seem to be looking like the wild man of Borneo, so that's 12 months of lockdown and beard, and I look a little bit different in that photograph there from 5 or 6 years ago when I was a little bit more excited about the job. Anyway, we were looking at building an integrated beef supply chain. I'd been the vet with one of the good blade farming, good supply chains in the business that a lot of you, I'm sure, worked with over the years. And being the vet there, I'd seen a lot of good things, and I'd also seen a lot of bad things as far as integration and dairy beef. And we wanted to look at that a little bit differently, and thought the best thing to do would be to spend maybe a year or two investigating where supply chains worked and how integration might work. And I applied for Nuffield Scholarship, so I was very lucky I actually got that, and that opened a lot of doors. And if anyone's interested in Nuffield Scholarships, I can thoroughly recommend them from the point of view of learning and just opening your mind up to different things. I don't know if any of you have done them, but if you aren't and you're thinking about it, it's well worthwhile. What did I do for my Nuffield Scholarship? I wanted to look at integrated supply chains and integrated production, and that wasn't necessarily just in beef or even dairy beef. I went to look at car manufacturing, vegetable production, how supermarkets work, how buyers work, how marketing works, and trying to put all that together into how supply chains actually function, both up, down, and what they call horizontal, as well as vertically integrated supply chains, which is quite interesting when you start to look at how some of these work. And also within that, looking at dairy beef in particular, going to countries that have a large dairy population that may or may not have actually had a dairy beef industry. A good example would be New Zealand, which is a very big dairy beef industry, and right next door you have Australia, which has very little dairy beef, and you can't understand why one has and one doesn't, and it was interesting just to go and see that. And then the same in the US, where dairy beef comes and goes depending on the beef price in reality, but that's growing again over there. So just looking at what people were doing and big commercial operations, and seeing if we could actually do something in the UK to work alongside that. What did I find? And I'm sure a lot of you are more than aware of this, but the most interesting thing I found was that dairy cows do make good beef mothers. The dairy industry across the world is pretty much regulated by breeding and breeding management, and you do get the majority of cows are bred very similarly, and you get large herds of cows which are bred very similarly and can form good brood mothers if we can get the right genetics onto them, that is. You can integrate them into supply chains, and there are models across the world, and we're not going to go into those tonight, but there are a lot of them doing a lot of good work out there already. And the biggest supply chain I saw was producing about 30,000 head a year of Wagyu cross in New Zealand that was all going into high-end markets in Asia and America. But interestingly, what we also saw was the idea of producing consistency, which is really important. And that's kind of what has taken me on a journey over the last 4 or 5 years, is this idea of trying to get a consistent quality product. And understanding technical approach and understanding how we actually go about that and how we manage the supply chain. And in reality, I suppose, we're sitting here now with a beef industry that looks very different to how it looked 10 years ago. We're looking at a beef price today, which we've never seen really before. But is that going to carry on? Are there opportunities to do better? Are there opportunities to invest? But the main area for me back in 5 years ago, especially, was you've got value beef and you've got commodity beef, and then you've got high-end premium beef, and where does dairy beef fit within that? Because actually around the world, dairy beef seems to fit in different places, depending sometimes on the genetics, but more than often not actually on the carcass itself. So that's where we sort of came about with our idea for producing StraightLine Beef as a business. This is just one of our sort of grazing mobs. We would run mobs of 100 to 150 cattle, and you can see we're grazing all sorts of different animals, and part of the project was actually more about producing a consistent carcass than producing a consistent name on a tin. And that was something that I sort of picked up on with this whole idea of the supply chain for dairy beef across the world was all about quality, not necessarily the name on the tin. And if you look at, even if you look at Angus in America, when it's called certified Angus, it might not actually be Angus you're eating, but the beef quality you're eating there is top notch every single time. Whereas in the UK, we seem to be stuck on it's Angus, it's Hereford, it's whatever, but actually is the meat eating quality anywhere there? Perhaps not. So things we've learned over the last few years has been that still this country is not rewarding us probably for consistency and quality. It's rewarding us still for carcass and yield, and probably not actually paying what a lot of the guys that are sitting here and girls listening to this right now are aiming to do, which is produce consistent animals all the time. And I think that's where we go a little bit wrong, because in reality, we want the best eating experience for our piece of steak. We don't necessarily want the biggest steak in the world. What we actually want is a piece of beef that you can eat, and every time you eat that piece of beef, you know it's going to have a good taste, it's going to be succulent, it's going to be tender, it's going to have juiciness, and it's going to have a flavour which you are happy to eat. And the work that AHDB has done over the years, it shows if you have a bad eating experience eating a piece of beef, it can take weeks, if not months, to go back and buy another piece of beef. If you have a bad experience eating a piece of chicken, you'll probably be back eating a piece of chicken within 7 days. So, you know, we've also got to think as ourselves within this whole industry, if we are going to have a supply chain, an integrated supply chain, we need to think more about our customers. So what did I learn in the last 5 years? The old adage about, you know, how do you make a millionaire out of farming? Start with 10 million and work for 5 years and you'll be left with $1 million. That is absolutely true. And you know, what we've learned over the last 5 years has been that we need continuous management. We need a supply chain that can follow cattle through and can understand what's going on and how and why, and then actually act on making changes. We've learned about the cost of production, but probably not about compromising on the quality and consistency, because as soon as we start to bring the price down too much on our feed price or however we're managing the cattle, we start to see a lack of production, or we start to see a consistency stretching in. And the same if we're looking at the raw material coming in when you're buying calves, etc. What else have we learned? We've learned that we can utilize technology an awful lot more. And I think with something like Breedr on board now, we actually have the ability to start to scrutinize data even better and start to understand really how these animals are performing. And I think that's probably where we've been missing for the last 4 or 5 years within our own supply chain, has been that ability to consistently manage across each farm, each unit, and going back to even dairy farms of origin has been quite easy, but to go back to look at single genetics and sires and sire performance. Other areas that are my little drum that I like to bang about now is how we manage our grassland and how we can actually maximise returns from grazing cattle. And again, weighing and managing the cattle at grass helps you understand how your grass is performing. And I think we can do more with grass and grazing in this country. If we can get cattle grazing and growing at more than 1 kilo a day at grass for a whole 180 days plus grazing season, that takes a huge cost out of growing on dairy beef or any beef to that matter. And I think that within the UK, we have generally a favourable growing area for grass with the right climate. And we can make better grass, we can make better use of that grass, and even targeting silage quality is another classic example. If we can get better quality silage, like we were just weighing young stock there this week that might have only been housed for 90 days, but they've been growing on just grass silage for those 90 days, doing 1 kilo a day. So if we can get that right and manage the cattle right, then in actual fact, there's a lot of cost can be taken out of this system, and at the same time getting more of what we want out of this in a more consistent product. So the areas we've been really looking at for performance over the last 4 or 5 years have started to come together, and I would suppose this is why we're sitting here with Breedr, would be the likes of cloud-based data management. We run a lot of cattle over 5 units, and out of those 5 units we could move in cattle. Some cattle will be staying in one place right through to slaughter. Some cattle will be moving twice. It just depends on what animals they are and what we're going to do with them and what their end market is. But we need to start to analyze these animals better, and we talk about big data, and in reality, a good example for us would have been in our system. At one point, we were running, we were using Farm Wizard, and at one of the farms, we actually couldn't use Farm Wizard to analyze any of the data because the database got so big it just used to collapse, and we tried to download information out of it. And every time you're weighing an animal, you're creating another lot of data points, and I think that's something that we need to utilize more. But also looking at, say, health benefits or performance management, traceability, etc. Within our own sheds, we're looking at a lot of data there, humidity, temperature, daylight lengthening, etc. All these things we're sort of monitoring from afar, but actually, are we understanding what we're getting out of those, and what difference does it make turning lights on for an extra length of time? We've done some work with that and sort of shown for ourselves that having daylight lengthening lights in our sheds is worth a fair bit of extra dry matter intake. And then the same at grassland monitoring. There's going to be more and more data starting to come out of monitoring our fields and utilising that data. Is going to become more and more important over the coming years. And I would think that the likes of being able to use satellite surveillance on fields for targeting inputs or for targeting reseeding, etc., is going to be important going forwards as well. So using that data, however you want to say it, to me is becoming more and more key. And within our own system, we're always looking at what's not working, what's working, and can we make changes? And a good example would be on our ration with our grass silage. We've been changing grass silage over the last few weeks. We changed clamp, and we've lost getting on for about 200 grams a day on production over about 6 weeks. And although we've been tweaking the diet and working with our nutritionist Heffen, it's taken until the last 2 weeks for that to finally click. And suddenly, the last weighing session on Monday there, we were back to well over 2 kilos a day on daily live weight gain on a lot of the animals. Just like, what's just changed? And you just think, well, we've finally got that dialed in back to where it should be. So now we've got to keep it there. And hopefully we've got about 1,000 tons of grass to get through before we have to make any changes again. But it's a good example of understanding. If we weren't weighing those cattle, we could have been carrying on feeding like we were. And after 6, 8, 10, 12 weeks, we could have easily been 18, 20, 25 kilos adrift of where we were expecting to be on our finishing cattle. And all the costs would have been the same. So I think there's a lot more we can do within our own system, understanding these trends and looking at them and making changes and understanding what that change might have done. I think this is a sort of my advert really for again, understanding the impact of what we might do and how we might go about making change. So within our own system, we started working as if we were dairy farming the cattle, basically. And in dairy farming, it's all about dry matter intake of the cows, maximizing dry matter intake and getting consistency. And that again is something we can monitor and manage with our feeding system. But can we actually look at feed wastage? You know, can we look at shrink in the diet and the clamp, how much grub are we chucking away at the end of each day, and so on and so forth? Because actually we can push these cattle on a daily basis and see them going up. If you've got a pen of 40 cattle gaining 2 kilos a day, after 5 days, you've got another whole animal equivalent in that pen, if you think about it on a ration front. So can we see them actually going up and intakes going up based on that kind of idea as well? So, and I think if you're a dairy farmer, it's very simple, because every day or every other day you're sending off milk, so you can see very quickly what feed's doing. Within the beef system, if you're weighing once every 6 or 8 weeks, are you really actually understanding what's going on with some of your cattle? With the young stock, yeah, they just need to tick over. But when you're finishing cattle, and once they're onto that finishing diet, which could be costing you £2.50 a day, if we're not actually following what they're doing and how much they're eating, are they eating to appetite, are they eating above that, are they eating beyond that, how much is being wasted? There's a lot of costs involved there that can multiply very quickly, especially if, like I say, we were with our grass silage and our grass finishers, missing out on 200 grams a day on 250 cattle, 200 cattle every day. So, you know, these are the type of things we need to understand a bit more of. So that idea of routine weighing, and I think we sometimes, and I'll hold my hand up to this, I like to weigh the cattle and understand what's going on, and occasionally we can get a bit ahead of ourselves, and so we've had to stand back a little bit, and Breedr's helped us with that, to understand that when we're weighing the cattle, we want to be looking at trends over, say, 60 days, 90 days, as well as what's happening over, say, the last 2 weeks or 4 weeks on finish. And I think that's probably something that, as the system's developing, we can get more of, to understand that dry matter intake, that daily live weight gain, and then actually start to put together that cost per kilogram of gain. Because I think those things, when you put them all together, start to make a real difference to your business, and looking at physical performance versus what you budgeted them to do. Because that's probably been my biggest learning curve in the last 2 years, 3 years, is the spreadsheet might say X, but the cattle are not deciding to do that. And no matter how hard you push on, the cattle just won't do it sometimes. So it's going back again and understanding that and making changes. So here's a good example with us on how we might utilize Breedr. This is on our finishing bulls, and actually just looking at the idea of, you know, how much gain has that animal had in the last 30 days, 60 days, 90 days, because actually in reality, when we're coming up to finishing pens, we might be weighing every 2 or 3 weeks. Before that, we might be weighing just once a month, once we're into that finishing period. But for us, it's all about, you know, where are these animals, what genetics gave us those curve benders. So we're able to pull those curve benders out and continuously go back and say, okay, that dairy farm, using that genetics, we're getting 9 out of 10 animals are making bulls that are making 550 to 600 kilos at 12 months old. Because if we can do that, then that's the genetics we want, and that's the farm we want, and that's what we want to have. But on the other hand, we've also got some farms which just aren't performing, or we've got some sires. A classic example would be we're running 3 different Angus bulls across one unit at the moment, and we would run those 3 Angus bulls sort of in cycle, and you can see one of those bulls is consistently not performing, and yet is one of the highest selling Angus bulls in the country. And yet another bull that was there on test has just blown everything out of the water, and was doing exceedingly well until the Sainsbury's scheme pinched it and said that was for them. So that was a bit of a shame, but we already knew that bull was way ahead of a lot of the other performances we were seeing. Just sort of how else we can use that data. This is what we would get for our weekly reports on our feeding system. And again, it's all about, you know, feeding accuracy and how much are we actually putting in the feed, and how much is that going forward. So we're consistently working. The guys actually are very much drilled into, you know, the last 7 days, where is our error and how much of our feed is inaccuracy or inaccurate. And again, it's about just that same things with the dairy farm, getting that consistency there. So when we tie that kind of accuracy up on our feeding, and we know that that's doing its job, and yet the cattle aren't performing, and we're not getting very little waste, then you start to wonder, is the actual diet up to it? So just to surmise, because everybody's falling asleep after a long day, if we're going to look at things we need to consider then for dairy beef supply chains, one of the key areas for us in the last couple of years has been that there's no point building a supply chain if your end customer isn't that interested in it, and that's been a particularly tough thing to do. And I'll be honest, we're producing an animal that we've now got one buyer who wants a very specific type of animal, and we're doing very well with that. But the other animals that we're producing, they're just going out into the open market until quite recently. You're too much of the vagaries of volatility. So we need that stability. We need that end product that has a buyer already lined up with a specification. And that's how your real supply chain works, especially integrated. Cost of production, we've got to get better again, still at our cost per kilogram again. And I think that's where we're starting to get the idea with utilizing the system we have now for monitoring across all the units. We can start to see, you know, this animal is X, its weight for age is Y, and we know what feed's been going in, therefore we're pretty happy it's actually ahead of the curve. But if it's behind the curve, what we're going to do with that animal? Because that's what we can start to do now, is pick out those poor performers and make sure that the mean is always moving forward. We want to look at that, therefore, in the system costs, because within the beef system, and if you're just a pure finisher, all you're ever trying to do as a pure finisher is buy your store cattle as cheaply as possible and make sure you can make a margin when you come to sell it. If you're running a supply chain all the way through from dairy farm to slaughter, it's actually about minimizing the cost all the way through and maximizing the end return. And within the beef supply chain and within the beef industry, you know, we'll all say it all the time, who actually makes the money? And in reality, for the amount of time and effort invested in cattle, there are better ways of probably making money than beef farming. If you're beef finishing, you are open to the vagaries of volatility in the marketplace unless you can do something different. But if you're in a supply chain like we've been for the last 3 or 4 years, producing 2,000-3,000 plus head of beef a year, taking them from a young age, which is what everybody wants, you really are open to the marketplace and the changes in feed prices and everything else. So who's really making the money at the end of the day is something we need to still get better at. And then finally, you know, what does have the biggest impact on production? Is it genetics? Is it management? And if we don't have the ability to go back and dredge through your data and analyze it, then in reality, you could be blaming one problem when actually you've got another problem there all the time that's the issue. And I think that's something that like I say, we've got 3 Anguses on one farm being used, and we knew one Angus within 6 or 7 months of those Angus calves coming through the system. We knew this one bull was just a constant curve bend. It didn't matter if it was a heifer or a steer or a bull. Those animals were always in the top percentile. Just the same, we have one bull that we would never use now at all, and if we see it, we'd actually try actively not to buy it as a calf, because we just know it's not going to perform, and it definitely won't give us the grades, carcass grades. So finally, you know, where are we going to now within the industry? You know, there's a lot happening. Production-based sales, so actually looking at forward-looking agreements, contracts for finishing cattle, minimum prices, and I'm sure most of us are now got offers from processors saying, oh, we'll never drop below that price, or it doesn't matter what happens with that animal, we'll never drop below that price, or this is all happening because they're so short of beef. And on the other hand, you go back 12 months ago, you know, we went at the beginning of March, we were selling Belgian blue steers to one meat processor. We were $3.55 a kilo on an hour at the beginning of March 20. At the end of March 20, we were $2.92 a kilo. Now, COVID was just something you couldn't have gambled on at all, but that beef was still sold. And at the end of the day, I don't think anyone lost any money on that beef apart from the producer, because that beef still found a home somewhere at the end of the day. And even if it was later on with the stakings or whatever, we've got to know what we're actually doing. We've got to understand what we're trying to do. You've got contracts out there now where they're trying to tie you in with genetics, and the end customer is actually linking that to genetics and to a contract. That's based on their experience of meat yields through the processing plant, and meat quality, eating quality, fat cover. We've now got contracts on the table where people don't want a lot of fat, so suddenly we've gone from why aim for 4 Ls when they'll actually penalise you if you hit 4 L. We want 3, and that's because we want to cut back on trim and waste. But it does make it harder to hit a 300 kilo carcass on dairy beef if you're only putting in for a 3 a lot of times, especially on these heifers. Maybe we need to be starting thinking to talk more about eating quality. You know, can we be paid for eating quality and predictable beef? And that's, when I say predictable, like I say, it goes back to that steak earlier, you know, juiciness, tenderness, succulence. You know, can we actually, will somebody finally pay us for, like they do around the world, for eating quality? And there is some work going on in Wales at the moment with eating quality as part of what they're looking at. And then again, rewarding an investment. You know, if you go to the market and you see cattle being sold, you can see, you know, big plonky Belgian blue steers at 27 months old being sold for 1,100 quid because they're going to make a lot of carcass beef. And then you can see really nice Belgian blue steer at 15.5 months old being sold for 100, 150 quid less. He's got age on his side, but actually also his carbon footprint is going to be 50% of what that animal that's 28 months old is going to be when it's sold and killed. You know, is that going to start to come through? Are we going to start to be rewarded for age? Are we going to start to be penalised for age? Certainly, but will we be rewarded for age, or will it just be like red tractor, where suddenly it's the norm and you don't get any benefit from it whatsoever? So these are all things we need to really be looking at for the future. So I think, you know, when we're looking at that, we need to be thinking about these cattle and what we're doing with them. So final sort of sum up then, Ian, you know, we've got to stop this beef market volatility somehow. And I'm really hoping Breedr's got some of that on board. We've got to be able to use our technology to work out where things can be made better and how to sell that to our end user as well for traceability and safety. I think we can also use that technology to find these marginal gains where the best beef farmers are already doing a very, very, very good job. But if you look at Dave Brailsford and the British cycling team, it's all about marginal gains. If I can get an extra 100 grams a day of daily live weight gain out of the animals because I can get them to eat an extra half a kilo because they've got an extra half an hour of light, is that worth it or not? Is there marginal gains to be had there? These sort of things as well. So, you know, but we've got to be able to analyze that data alongside the costs. And I think that's maybe the next step for us is to start to take those measurements and go a little bit further. But the price we get paid for has to be paid for quality and transparency of that beef production and not just beef yield. And I don't know if the retailers are ready for that, really. I'm not sure the meat processors are at all. Maybe you guys think differently about it. But you know, if you look at it, we've got contracts on offer now. I can remember 3 years ago during the drought when meat was getting really short in 2018 and everybody was barbecuing consistently and the beef price was going to be as high as it ever been. You know, there was a lot of discussion about contracts at that point, but as soon as the price started to fall again, the contracts fell away and suddenly we were back to boom and bust. So whatever we get lined up now, it has to be something that gives us some solidity. You know, we are already looking at a business which has got 1,000 cattle less in it in StraightLine from a year ago. In probably another year's time, we'll have another 1,000 cattle less if we don't see some improvement in this whole industry, because we just can't keep being insane and banging our head against the brick wall thinking we're going to get a different outcome. So, you know, that's really it, I think, Ian.
Thanks, mate. Well, can everyone hear me? So I'll just try and, I've lost my controls for Zoom, apologies. So, Rob, thank you very much. I'm assuming you can hear me.
Yep.
So, I was going to try and share my screen, but now I've lost the controls. Okay. So, Rob, thank you. If there is questions, please do put them into the chat. And I think it probably leads on quite nicely, Rob, into some of the things that I wanted to talk about now in terms of what we're up to and how it's some of the things that Breedr is working on. So I think the first thing for us, apologies, is chat. Rightio. Why can't I share my screen? I've been the techie in the room, and now I've completely stuffed it up. So, 1 second, everyone. Okay, here we go. Desktop one. So I think, while everyone thinks of any questions they may have for Rob, and please do come back with any. I think from Breedr perspective, just to sort of back up what Rob's saying, and as finishers, a lot of you, if you, I'm assuming everyone on this has sort of got started with Breedr. If you haven't, then please do get in contact. For everyone who, hopefully you can see my screen now. For everyone who hasn't, there's a chat within the Breedr tool for speaking with Gabby and our support team. They can help get you started and synced on the platform when you need to. But I think, just to back up some of the things that Rob was talking about is once you start weighing, once you start looking at some of that data on your farm, you're able to come into a lot of our reports and start to make the most of some of those reports. So for example, in here we have sire reports. So I've used James's farm, but within here you can start to see, even within his, which sires are producing the highest daily live weight gain. Which ones, and the difference here between these ones is 0.2 kilogram gain per day, or 200 grams a day, which adds up over time to about 3 or 4 months of life if you can do that consistently over animals. So starting to use some of those, some of that data. Similar sort of thing when you start to look at birth farms. So within the birth farms of where you've got your animals, we have data and charts within here to show how many animals from each holding, but then also to start to see which holdings are producing animals that grow at a higher daily live weight gain versus others. So all of that data starts to be in there, and it starts to let you start to analyze it. I think your big point at the end, and where we're starting to see some real traction now as well from a Breedr perspective is, as you all know, we've launched our Breedr trading. So if you are weighing, you're able to put animals up for sale on here, and we really are focused on how that data then, not only when you sell with Breedr as a buyer, do you get to see those weights that are coming through. So you can look at trades that are live on the system, and you can have a look at exactly what the weights are within those animals. You can also look at medical records and everything that goes with them. And it makes you look at and be able to sort of make a good understanding of what you're getting before you buy them. But I suppose the exciting thing for us is this also, as the purchase happens, transfers all of that data on the supply chain. And I think, Rob, to your point, what we're seeing is that the processors and the retailers are changing, and we have some very exciting news coming in the next couple of weeks for sort of guaranteed forward prices to enable farmers to start budgeting. But it is based on lifetime data, and I think that's because what we're seeing is a greater understanding of the importance of getting lifetime data through the system, the importance of what the net zero targets matter for future, and I think the processors and retailers alike are starting to understand that data that's coming through. So, and with that comes some pretty good opportunities for the bigger finishers and the finishers who want to build out supply chains to be able to really start to make an understanding of what they're going to get for the cattle before they buy them, an understanding of what that animal's got to do to make them money, and also to start planning around the stuff that's in your control. And suddenly, if you can take away the end price as being a big variable, it really lets you build a profitable business. So I think some of those sort of things are on there. We've seen really strong trade with calves and stores coming through the Breedr trading at the moment. And the exciting part is people who are buying those, if you want to talk to us about end prices now's a good time, because those animals come with data, and therefore they have that opportunity to get that bonus moving towards the end. Just a quick question from Jack on farm assurance. Yes, we are working on that one. We've paid Red Tractor to get access to the database. We've just got to drill it into the back end. So you will be able to see farm assurance and lifetime assurance also that comes with that, which will be quite important. So just Rob, a couple of questions before we're starting as well. from your perspective, what would you say is some of the biggest challenges in terms of managing that whole supply chain and actually sort of dealing with calf rearing through to finishing? Because it's, you know, usually when you're talking to people, you say, yeah, you should be just a calf rearer, or you should be just a finisher because that's what you're good at. How's that been? How's that, you know, what's been the success that's made that successful? So
maybe it's the other way. Maybe it's the other way around, Ian. It's probably. Can you hear me? Okay.
Yep, got you.
Yeah, it's probably the other way around. Of what's not worked, I think, is part of the biggest learning curve for us has been there are some very good people out there doing very good jobs, and then there are people out there who look like they should do a good job and can, and so there's a lot of learning for us has been in taking calves in, managing calves through. So it's, you know, I always give the analogy of it sort of like in building a car. If you don't start with the right chassis, you know, if you don't actually build that chassis true, doesn't matter what you do with it after that, it's still not going to be a very good car. And I think that's what we've learned for our beef has been, we don't start with the right dairy farm supplying the right calves and the right health and everything else, then it doesn't matter what we do after that, we're struggling. And we work within our own supply chain, taking about 2,000 calves a year from just 2 or 3 farms, and we've worked with farms that have done a great job. We work with farms that have done a great job for a while and then fallen away. And it's interesting actually looking at that side of the dairy beef really for us. We've always got underperformers. There's always a bell curve in every group of calves, but there are some calf rearers that can take an average bunch of calves and still produce some very good animals. And there are some calf rearers who can take an average bunch of calves and the mortality is higher, the daily live weight gain is slightly lower, but your bell curve is more stretched as well. So yeah, there's a lot to be said for really starting to understand the data and that side of it. But the main thing for us has been is getting the dairy farms on board. So getting the dairy farms to understand what we're doing, and when we take them through the supply chain, when we actually take them in from another supply chain through a collection centre, the bell curve on that group of say 50 calves is always going to be much broader than if we have them just off of our say we have 2 farms go in to form 50 calves from our own unit, and then we have 50 calves coming in from a collection centre. The mortality might not be very much different between the two, and even the disease level might not be much different between the two, depending on the time of year and the stressors and everything else that happens. But what we do see at the other end of it can be a huge variation in you know, daily live weight gain on the unit. We can run from, our target would be over 1 kilo a day, and for our bulls we'd want over 1.2 kilos a day from arrival on the calf unit to whenever we come to do castrations. And the collection centre cattle, we're lucky if 30% of them will do target. From our own units, it would be 80% of them would do target. So that's the big part that you start to see a difference in as well. So so managing that data and understanding. So there are farms we've told collection centres now we won't have calves from certain farms because we just know they're not going to perform. And it might not even be in the calf unit. It might actually be by the time we get them a little bit further down the line, we realise we actually look at lifetime mortality as well. So not just calf unit mortality and calf unit performance. We look at lifetime mortality and lifetime performance as well now for some of the supply farms. Yeah. And that gives you an idea that there are certainly your numbers that consistently just don't produce. And there are other farms that consistently do a bloody good job.
Yeah. So another question here, Rob, for you, coming from Michael, and opening a bit of a can of worms on the vegan comment, but we'll come to that one in a second. But in terms of sort of the future for ROI, I think you talked a bit about sort of securing future pricing and being able to budget and sort of feed. But you know, given you've seen a reduction in numbers and sort of real focus from yourself over the last bit, you know, what do you think you can do now to secure sort of future ROI within your business moving forward, or for the industry?
We've reduced numbers because we realised that actually the more partner farms we're working with, the harder it was to manage across our supply chain. So that's a large part of why we're dropping on numbers. Because when the beef prices 380, you can make money, but when the beef price is 325, you can't have any squeaky wheels whatsoever. And I think that's where we've started really to understand the situation, and that's a sad part of it. For the future of the industry, I think the vegan, without going into the whole vegan lobby and everything else, we're very lucky in the world that whenever people move from lower class to middle class and have spare money, the first thing they want to do is eat McDonald's and drink Costa coffee, and it's happening all around the world, and that's actually growing global demand for beef as quick as the vegans can make a difference in one country, and other countries getting excited about eating beef. And I think that is not going to go anywhere quickly, especially with the situations at the moment. So for us, reducing cattle numbers is all about doing our job better with what we have, and understanding and trying to mitigate problems when we see volatility. So reducing numbers and getting some contracts into place. We've already got certain contracts on minimum price, for example, on cattle going into one processor. We've got one contract with one processor where we know what our price is the next 12 months on certain cattle. So, but being able to also, for us, I think, not putting all our eggs in one basket. So not having just one processor take all our cattle, having 2 or 3 processors that we can put the right animal into the right job as well, because that's where you start to really lose money. It's not the top 25%, it's the bottom 25%. The top 25% should always make you money, but the bottom 25% can lose you a hell of a lot more than the top 25% make you, especially if you're trying to sell to the same buyer. So we've got to really try, I think, as an industry, to move away from that and get people to understand what we're doing is producing a quality product in Britain, and the vegan lobby they're not going to go away. So actually, maybe it's better that we get the top 25% of the public to understand when they go out to a restaurant to ask for British beef. Not just accept that it might come from, no offence, Ian, not because it might come from Australia, say, for example, because that's what's happening at the moment. The restaurant industry, people are getting away with it, aren't they? So yeah, so I think, yeah, if we can, I'd rather do 2,000 head in the next 12 months on contracts and actually understand where we are for all our pricing for the majority of that through contracts than do 3,600 head on open market, because you just don't know where you're going to be. This way, at least we can understand where a lot of our cattle are going and what price we're going to receive, so we can at least do some form of budgeting.
Yeah, and just another question there is also, which I think I'll probably take it, so it's just how cattle are not the root of all evil for climate change. And I think, what we're seeing in our discussions is that actually the first thing is for us as an industry to sort of prove what we're doing on climate change and being able to have the data behind it, because just saying, trust us, I'm a doctor, it probably is not good enough any longer. We really have to be able to articulate. And I think, but that said, NFUs set their targets to try and get us to net zero, which is a big goal. But I think even that is looking hard. And actually one of the biggest gains we have is to be more efficient on beef production, is from what I've seen. Like, we did some work with Rothamsted Research recently, and if you could get average age at slaughter down to even 25 months, that's about a 30% cut of methane in the beef supply chain. So I think, we need to be then able to articulate those numbers. And, you look at the work by Oxford on global cooling and what methane impact can have. If we can do that, it actually has a cooling impact over the next 10 years from a methane perspective. So I think, from a breeder perspective, and Rob, you may disagree, but I feel part of what we need to do is be able to articulate what we're already doing as farmers in a much better way.
Absolutely. Yeah. I think if you're with this sort of software, you can actually give big data sets and actually show the movement in, systems, movement in production. The good, like I said, that example of the in the market where the buyer who's buying the 28-month-old blue at £1,200 or £1,100, and then buying another one that's 13 months younger for £1,000, the one seller's probably okay, and the other seller's probably ecstatic. He's got £1,100 for it, but actually he could have had 2 animals in the same period of time, and made, yeah, he wouldn't have made 2,200, but he'd have made 2,000 if he'd sold the same, good animals twice at 15 months. And I think that's, I think the Irish have done some work that shows if they reduce their average age at slaughter by 1 month from 28 to 27 months, they could have an extra 40,000 suckler cows in the country with the same methane footprint.
Yeah.
That's a phenomenal number when you think about it. And we have a very, very good industry in this country, and a lot of it's been born on the back of BSE, that we've got younger cattle, and we've pushed. But the Irish, when they were having their recent meat protests, were actually protesting about the price of beef because they weren't getting a premium at over 30 months old. And they, not that they got a premium for under 30 months old, and then they were saying, well, why can't we get something for over 30 months old? And you just think this is just it's a crazy industry when that's how people might view things. So yeah.
And I think that all then comes down to, there's still a lot of standards to be built though, like what is grass sequestration for carbon and so on. So there's a lot of that sort of stuff that still is to be sorted out, but I think the people who are on data will be the most important. So, but Rob, probably to wind it up now, because I think we've probably gone a bit over time anyway, but thank you very much for joining us. Really appreciate you coming in. Any questions for Rob later on, or any interest in having a chat to as to how we can help address some of the issues that Rob's brought up tonight, please do get in touch. My email is ian@breedr.co, so feel free to get in touch with me directly, or I can drop you a mobile number if you don't have it already, and give us a call. So I think last one, just in terms of the hat, I'll just quickly award that to whoever's still here. So Dylan, you got a new hat to go with your new tractor, mate. So I will be getting something sent out to you, so you've got that. And then finally, next month in the finish one, we're actually going to change tack a bit, and we'll do a bit of talking about trading in that, but we're also going to get someone in to talk about trace elements, which has been pretty close to my heart. My old man did his Nuffield on trace elements, so we're going to start talking a bit about trace elements. I'm sure Rob, you'd have a bit to say on trace elements as well when we come to that next month. So, but thank you all very much for joining. And as I say, we're always here if you need help getting started, or assistance to do anything similar to what Rob's been talking about tonight. Just get in touch, and look forward to seeing you all soon, and hopefully back on farm very soon as well, with everything that's happening with the vaccination. So have a good evening, everyone, and thank you very much.